My name is Sophia Harris, and I'm 30 years old. Life wasn't always as complicated as it is now. A few years ago, I was happily married to Ethan, the man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. We lived in a beautiful house, had a promising future ahead, and I believed we were a team. But everything changed the moment my father passed away. My father, Jonathan Harris, was my rock. He built a small but successful business that provided for our family. When he passed, he left everything to me, his only child. The inheritance included the family business, some savings, and the house I grew up in. It was his way of ensuring I would always be taken care of. At first, Ethan was supportive, or so I thought. He told me I was lucky to have such a thoughtful father and promised to help me manage everything. But I didn't realize then that his support came with strings attached. Ethan wasn't alone in his plans. His mother, Martha, was always in the background, whispering in his ear and planting seeds of manipulation. Martha had a way of making me feel small. She'd criticize my decisions, tell me I didn't deserve the life I had, and insist that Ethan deserved more credit for supporting me. A man like Ethan shouldn't have to depend on his wife, she'd say. It always felt like she was watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I ignored the red flags, hoping things would get better. But Ethan started pressuring me to move my inheritance into a joint account, arguing that it would make things easier for us as a couple. When I refused, he became distant and cold. It was like living with a stranger. One day, I noticed something was wrong. Bills from the business were piling up, and my bank account wasn't adding up. I confronted Ethan, but he brushed it off, saying I was overreacting. That's when I decided to check with my father's lawyer, Mr. Caldwell. What I discovered left me numb. Martha and Ethan had forged my signature on documents transferring ownership of my father's business to Martha. They had drained the savings account and even used the house as collateral for a loan. Everything my father worked for was gone, and I didn't even know it was happening. I confronted Ethan and Martha in a rage, demanding answers. Martha, calm as ever, smiled and said, "You should have been smarter, Sophia. You're too naive to handle this kind of responsibility." Ethan didn't even look at me. He just stood there, silent and guilty. With no assets and nowhere to go, I was forced to leave the home I once loved. I packed a few belongings, took my daughter, Lila, and moved into a tiny apartment on the outskirts of a city. I was heartbroken and betrayed, but I knew this wasn't the end of my story. They thought they had won. They thought they'd broken me. But they underestimated my determination. What they stole from me wasn't just money. It was my father's legacy, my trust, and my future. And I was going to take it all back. Starting over wasn't easy. My tiny apartment was a far cry from the comfortable home I'd lost. I had to juggle work, bills, and raising Lila on my own. Every time I looked into her innocent eyes, I reminded myself that I couldn't give up. I had to fight back, not just for me, but for her future. The turning point came a few months later when I received an unexpected call from Mr. Caldwell, my father's lawyer. He asked to meet in his office, saying he had important information. Nervous but hopeful, I agreed. When I arrived, Mr. Caldwell greeted me warmly. "Sophia, I've been reviewing your father's estate, and I noticed some irregularities. I thought you should know." He explained how Martha and Ethan had forged my signature to take over the business and savings. "The good news is," he said, "we have a trail of evidence. Bank records, fake documents, even witnesses who can confirm the forgery. We can build a strong case against them." Hearing those words felt like a lifeline. For the first time in months, I felt like I had a chance to take back what was mine. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "First," he said, "we need to gather more evidence. I recommend hiring a private investigator to dig deeper into their activities. If Martha has been running the business, she's likely committed other crimes, like tax fraud or embezzlement. We need to uncover everything." With Mr. Caldwell's help, I hired Jake Harper, a private investigator with a reputation for uncovering even the most hidden secrets. Jake started by looking into the business accounts and Martha's financial records. It didn't take long for him to find discrepancies. She's been pocketing profits, underreporting earnings, and siphoning money into offshore accounts, Jake reported. This isn't just about stealing your inheritance. This is a full-blown financial crime. The more I learned, the angrier I became. Martha hadn't just taken my father's legacy. She had used it as her personal cash cow. Ethan, meanwhile, was living off the stolen money without a care in the world. They had no idea their carefully constructed web of lies was about to unravel. With the evidence piling up, Mr. Caldwell suggested filing a lawsuit. But I wanted more. I didn't just want justice in court. I wanted to confront Martha and Ethan face to face. I wanted them to see the strength they thought they'd crushed. We decided to stage the confrontation at a family gathering Martha was hosting. It was a bold move, but I knew it was the only way to expose her lies publicly. I prepared for the event carefully, making sure I had every piece of evidence ready to present. The day of the gathering, I walked into Martha's grand home with my head held high. The room fell silent as I entered. I could feel their eyes on me, some curious, others hostile. Martha approached me with her signature fake smile. "Sophia," she said sweetly. "How nice of you to join us." I didn't waste any time. "Cut the act, Martha," I said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "I know what you did. You and Ethan stole my inheritance, forged my signature, and drained everything my father worked for." Gasps filled the room. Martha's smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said coldly. I pulled out the evidence, the forged documents, the financial records, and Jake's findings. "These prove everything. You've been lying, stealing, and committing fraud for months." Ethan tried to intervene, but I silenced him with a glare. "Don't even start, Ethan. You're just as guilty as she is." Martha's face turned pale as the weight of the evidence sank in. The family members around us began whispering, their trust in her shattered. "You'll regret this, Sophia," Martha hissed, but her voice was shaking. "No, Martha," I said firmly. "You're the one who's going to regret it." The family confrontation was only the beginning. After exposing Martha and Ethan in front of everyone, I filed a lawsuit against them with the help of Mr. Caldwell. The case wasn't just about reclaiming my inheritance. It was about holding them accountable for every crime they committed. The legal process was long and grueling, but I was ready for the fight. The courtroom became the stage where their lies unraveled, and my truth was finally heard. The first day of the trial was nerve-wracking. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Mr. Caldwell, while Martha and Ethan sat across the room with their lawyer. Martha wore her usual smug expression, but I could see the tension in her posture. She wasn't as confident as she pretended to be. The prosecutor started by presenting the forged documents. "Your Honor, these signatures were verified by a handwriting expert and confirmed to be falsified. The defendant, Martha Harris, used these documents to steal the plaintiff's business and savings." Martha's lawyer tried to argue that the documents were legitimate, but the evidence was overwhelming. The handwriting expert testified, and the bank records backed up every claim. Next, Jake Harper, the private investigator, took the stand. He detailed how Martha had been funneling money from the business into her personal accounts. "She created fake invoices and pocketed the profits," Jake explained. "This wasn't just a one-time act. It was a pattern of fraud." The turning point came when Ethan was called to testify. At first, he tried to defend himself, claiming he didn't know about the forgery. But the prosecutor was relentless, showing proof of his involvement. "Mr. Harris," the prosecutor said, "you signed off on several of these transactions. Are you saying you didn't notice the money disappearing?" Ethan squirmed in his seat. I thought Martha was handling everything," he stammered. Under cross-examination, Ethan broke down.
"Fine.
I knew about it. Martha convinced me it was the only way to secure our future. I didn't want to lose everything." His confession was a dagger in Martha's case. She glared at him, her composure finally cracking. After weeks of testimony and evidence, the judge delivered the verdict. Based on the overwhelming evidence, this court finds Martha Harris guilty of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. Ethan Harris is found guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud. The judge sentenced Martha to 10 years in prison and ordered her to pay restitution for the stolen money and damages. Ethan received a lighter sentence but was fined heavily, leaving him penniless. As I sat in the courtroom, tears filled my eyes, not because I was sad, but because justice had finally been served. The inheritance my father left me was returned, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. With the court's ruling, I regained ownership of my father's business and the money Martha stole. I immediately began rebuilding the business, determined to honor my father's legacy. It wasn't easy, but every step felt like a victory. Lila and I moved into a new home. Nothing extravagant, but it was ours. I promised myself that no one would ever take away what I worked for again. Martha's imprisonment was a public scandal. Her friends and community turned their backs on her, disgusted by her greed and betrayal. Ethan, left with nothing, disappeared from my life. I didn't care where he went. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with the consequences. 1 year later, I stood outside my father's business, now thriving under my leadership. I looked up at the sign bearing his name and smiled. "We did it, Dad," I whispered. "I made things right." Lila ran up to me, her laughter filling the air. I picked her up and hugged her tightly. This was our fresh start, and I wasn't going to let anyone ruin it. Sometimes, life throws challenges at you that seem impossible to overcome. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that strength comes from within. Martha and Ethan thought they could destroy me, but they only made me stronger. Now, I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving. And I know my father would be proud.